Welcome back, everyone. George here with Aquatic Concepts. Today we're going to be talking about discus fish. Everything you needed to know about discus, but were afraid to ask. And that is the theme of the day. We're going to have a slightly different format here today. We're going to be actually looking at discus in my gallery as I talk. Kind of think of it as a book on tape type video here. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, and that information is something that I hope you're going to get a lot of help making you decide whether or not discus are right for you, and also if you already have discus or thinking about getting discus, how to get started in keeping discus fish, but also keeping them healthy and happy. That is so important that we do that. Now, the first part of this is going to be whether or not you believe that you're qualified at this stage of the hobby in keeping discus fish. And that can be a very difficult thing to ask, because a lot of times we want to keep discus fish and we just go for it, and maybe we're not really prepared for it, and we get in way over our heads here. So the things that you need to really sit down and talk about is how dedicated are you to keeping discus fish because of the amount of work that's involved, and how much of a budget do you have, because this is not a cheap hobby for those of you who are thinking about raising discus fish. This hobby can cost you a lot of money to get started and maintain. So that's one thing you need to consider before you get into anything else. Also, I wanted you to understand that these fish are not as hard to raise as a lot of people would lead you to believe. That's the number one fallacy out there, is that these guys are very, very difficult to raise. Now, I will tell you that there are a few things about these fish that you need to consider before purchasing them, that you might think about as far as maintenance and their needs, as far as health needs and that kind of thing. Because let's face it, these guys are a more expensive fish, and when we are buying fish in this price range, we don't want to have problems and unable to afford to meet those challenges and take care of the fish properly. So let's talk about why you want to raise discus fish, and let's talk about whether or not it's a good idea on the budget that you have and the time that you have. The first thing that you're going to want to consider is whether or not you have a tank that is big enough to raise discus in. If you are looking at raising discus, I recommend, number one, that you keep them in a group. These fish are not a fish that you can do solo, and they are certainly not a fish that thrives when they don't have a group. The reason for that is that they're very social and they have a pecking order, and it's very important for them to thrive in a group rather than in small pairs or single fish in a tank. A lot of people go out and buy a discus fish and try to make it their centerpiece fish for their tank, and find that the fish just does not do well. They get very lonely and just really need the camaraderie of other discus in the tank with them. So the first thing you're going to need to look at is obviously whether or not you have a tank that is large enough to contain these fish. Now, I recommend, if you have 5 to 7 discus, that you have a minimum of 75-gallon tank. And when I say a 75-gallon tank, I'm talking about a 75 tall. You don't want to have a tank that's any less than 18 to 20 inches high, because these fish need that room. They not only need the room for health purposes, for a healthy tank, but they also need the room because, like I said, they're social creatures, and they will take up certain parts of the tank where other discus will take up another part of the tank. So it's very important that you keep that into consideration. If you're talking about putting discus, or thinking about, I should say, putting discus in a tank that is any less than 75 gallons, it can be done, but I certainly don't recommend it, because you're going to have a lot of challenges ahead of you if you go that route. Now, the second thing you want to take a look at is your budget, because as I said earlier in the beginning of the video, these are not cheap fish. They're not fish that you can just go and buy for $15 or $20. These fish can go anywhere from a smaller fish that is maybe 2 to 3 inches at $59, all the way up to $300 or $400, depending on how much you're able to spend on a single fish. So if you're getting into this hobby, know that these are expensive fish, and they're not something that you can just get into on the cheap and try to do it, because what you're going to find out is that these fish are going to bust your budget rather quickly if you have not taken into consideration all the things with the size of the tank, with the price of the fish, and the amount of filtration that you might need, or the quality, I should say, of filtration that you might be looking at here. So let's say you have both of those things out of the way. You have a large enough tank, a 75-gallon or bigger, and you want to raise some discus fish. The question is at that point is whether or not you can afford them. And as we talked about, these fish are not cheap. So take a look at both of those things and make sure that you understand that tank size and budget are the first two things you should be looking at if you're thinking about raising these fish. Now, the third thing that I would tell you is your time. Time is very important for these fish because they are a little bit more needy in the sense of water changes and those kinds of things. So if you're thinking about keeping discus and you don't have time for them, I would tell you just stay away from that particular type of fish. In fact, I would tell you if you don't have time on your hands that the fish keeping hobby in general is not something you probably want to dive into. If you are a busy person or someone who is out of town a lot or whatever, you're probably not going to be a candidate for keeping discus, certainly, let alone any other fish. So that's very important. I want you to think about how much time you have. These fish require water changes quite frequently. Now, I'm not a person that believes that you need to change the water daily. There are very, very serious people in this hobby, in the discus keeping hobby, I should say, that believe you should change the water every day 25% or every couple of days 50%. I think that that is nonsense. I've been keeping fish for many, many years, and I've never had a problem with that. So one of the things that you should know is that keeping discus fish are a bit more challenging in the sense that they need a little bit more of your time, but they don't need so much of your time that you're changing water every day and those kinds of things. That's just something that I don't believe, and I've never experienced that, and I have very, very healthy discus in my tanks, and we will talk a little bit more about that later on in the video. Now, these fish are carnivores, so you are going to have to think about the amount of budget that you can put away towards frozen foods such as beef heart, which is a very important part of their diet. Also frozen bloodworms or frozen blackworms. Do not use live red bloodworms for your fish, as they carry a lot of disease. I want to say that up front here, because when I'm telling you about the frozen variety of bloodworms, I am talking about brands like Hikari and those kinds of brands that guarantee their foods to be parasite free. The last thing you want is for your fish to end up with some kind of parasitical infection and end up having fish that die on you, or things that you don't recognize as being a disease, like wasting away. That's typically a sign of a parasite. And that can typically come from the types of food that you're feeding. But these fish do need a lot of different varieties of food in order to maintain their color and their size. Now, we're not trying to grow monsters here, so they don't need to be fed 10 times a day, as some people would suggest to you. I feed my discus twice a day, but I try to rotate the types of food that I am feeding them so that I am not giving them the same thing all the time. Now, discus can be very picky about food in the sense that it may take them a while to adjust to either a different food or a new food that you are introducing to them, simply because they are very, very picky and will snub a lot of different kinds of food that you may try on them. But what you want to do with discus is keep trying foods that are good for them. If they reject it at first, give them time. If they see the other discus in your tank poking at it or eating at it or picking at it, they will try it themselves. So it's very important that you know that a wide variety of foods are needed for these fish to maintain, like I said, color, body size, and a good, healthy weight size for this particular fish. Now that leads me into something else that I wanted to talk about, and that is that these fish are susceptible to certain diseases. So we have to be extremely careful about the cleanliness of the tank, and we also need to be careful about the kinds of foods that we might be introducing in the tank, and give you some tips on how to keep your fish in good shape. And the number one thing, as I said, water changes. Now I do water changes when I'm starting a tank. I do them every single day, about 25%. When I first introduce my fish, now this is long after your cycle has been done. The cycle must be done, and sometimes I recommend even waiting a month past your cycle to make sure that everything's nice and solid, and then add your fish into the tank, and understand that when you do that, you're probably going to get a little bit of a spike in that cycle of ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. And the way you're going to handle that is doing your water changes. Now your tank will adapt and colonize beneficial bacteria at a greater rate, which will help you to maintain your tank. But when you first put them in, it's going to be a little bit of a shock to your tank, because these fish are large. They're not small fish, and they will take some sense of thinking about the cleanliness of the tank. Now, what I recommend is after your fish have adapted, say after 2 or 3 weeks of doing 25% water changes every day, you can cut back to a 50% water change every 3 days, and then a 50% water change just twice a week, and you will be absolutely fine. One of the things that you have to do is decide what kind of tank that you want. Do you want a traditional South American tank where these fish originate from? You're going to find a lot of varieties of discus out there. There are wilds, and there are also hybrids. Now, the hybrids are the most common, and they come in every shape or every color, I should say, and that you can think of on the palette. It's just amazing how many different colors are available to us out there. But one of the things that you want to make sure of is that you understand that keeping the tank healthy is something that's very important. So when you are maintaining your tank, use something like a python or something like that to do your water changes, where you can vacuum glide over the top of your gravel, your sand, or whatever your substrate happens to be. Some people use a bare bottom tank. It just really depends on what it is, but gliding over the top of that and pulling up all of the waste from your fish that's in there is something that you're going to need to do at least once every week or once every 2 weeks at the maximum, just to make sure that you're getting the waste out of that tank so that you don't have a spike in ammonia, nitrates. Now, like I said, you're going to have that happen at first, but those water changes are going to take care of that, in the sense that if you keep up with the water changes, you're never going to see that spike happen. It's important that you do that to ensure that your fish are going to be healthy. Now, I get this question asked to me a lot, and as you can see from the tanks that I'm showing you here, plants in a discus tank are very important, and I'll tell you why. They don't have to be hugely planted. In fact, you don't want to hugely plant them, because you want space in your tank, and you want the ability for your fish not to hide, because if you put a lot of plants in your tank that are big enough, your fish are going to go and hide in there, and you're going to have a harder time when you first get your fish getting them to come out and be social with the rest of the discus in the tank, and that can be a problem. Now, when I'm talking about having plants in your tank, what I'm talking about is having a small amount of plants such as anubias, java fern, and some swords and things like that that don't require a lot of maintenance and can handle low light and are easy to maintain. But what those plants are going to do is suck up a lot of the organics in your water, which is basically waste and leftover food that doesn't get eaten and that sort of thing. And they are going to thrive on the waste in your tank. And that's why I recommend that you have a planted tank for your aquarium. It's not something that you have to do. It's just something that I recommend, simply because I think caring for your fish long term is going to give you a little bit of a leg up on the cleanliness of your water. Let's assume that those plants are just like another part of the filtration system in your tank, because that's exactly what they are. Plants pull out, like I said, the organics in your tank, and they use them as food, and not only does that help your plants grow, but it gets rid of that waste in your tank that you don't want. Now, we're getting to the end of this video as far as part one of it, and I'm going to come back in a week or two and put out another video that's going to give you a little bit more information about discus fish and what it's going to take. But there's a couple of things before you get started with your discus that I want to tell you before we end this video. Number one, discus are very sensitive to a lot of different diseases, bloat being one of them, where their swim bladder gets in trouble and gets infected, and that is probably one of the leading causes of death, other than flukes, parasitical flukes in their gills, and also worms in their digestive tract. If you see your fish wasting away and you see their forehead look like it's been pinched in, kind of like a piece of clay, that's one of those things that you want to watch for. If you're seeing that in your fish, then your fish are not healthy and probably need some attention. And when we get into part two of this, we are going to be talking a lot about maintaining the health of your fish and the kinds of medications that you might want to keep on hand, and fish medications that you might want to use monthly, just to make sure that your fish are free of parasites. And those kinds of things are going to be very important for the long-term health of your tank. So it's important that you know that there is some maintenance that goes along here. Well, thank you for joining me for part one of this video. Part two will be out, like I said, within a week or two. Leave your comments down below. Thank you for stopping by. And like I said, discus are expensive, but they're fun. They're not that hard to keep. Enjoy your fish. We will see you on the next one. Take care. We're out of here.